My name is Claire Rowan Hale. I was 38 years old when I found out that the woman I had called my mother-in-law for 11 years had never truly been Daniel's mother in the way she claimed, and that the life I had spent helping build under her rules had been standing on a lie older than my marriage. The first thing she ever taught me was not how this family ate or prayed or celebrated. It was how this family obeyed. Keys stay in order, Lydia Hale told me 3 days after my wedding, tapping the brass ring clipped inside the pantry door of the old Hale house in Briar Glen, Connecticut. Her nails were pale and perfect. Her voice never needed to rise. The silver key is for the records room. The black key is for the upstairs office. The bronze card stays with me. If you need anything, you ask. That was how she said everything. If you need anything, you ask. If you needed a check signed for the business, you asked. If Daniel wanted to move money from one account to another, he asked. If the florist needed approval for the foundation luncheon, I asked. If the heating repairman needed access to the back storage room in the family office, I asked. Lydia always said it with the calm certainty of a woman who believed permission was the same thing as love. By then, Daniel already moved around her like a son who had been taught from boyhood that gratitude and silence were the same virtue. He was warm with me, gentle in private, thoughtful in the small ways that mattered. He always put my tea mug on the right side because I am left-handed, and once, on a freezing morning in January, he drove back 20 minutes because I had forgotten my gloves in his truck. He was not a cruel man, but he had been raised inside Lydia's weather. He had learned not to question the wind. When I married into the Hale family, Daniel was still trying to pull the family restoration company out of a bad period. Hale Heritage Management had money, but not liquid money, land, old properties, consulting contracts, historical estate management, preservation grants. It looked rich from the outside and pinched from the inside. Daniel had the talent. I had the discipline. Lydia had the access. That was the structure. Daniel was the public face. I was the one behind the numbers, the schedules, the donor dinners, the employee calendars, the invoices, the late-night corrections, the weekends spent fixing bids, the holiday calls, the polite smiles, the handwritten thank you notes, the trays of food I carried into meetings where men complimented Daniel's vision and forgot my name before dessert. Lydia handled the accounts that mattered, the family trust, the protected funds, the private approvals, the historical property rights, and what she called the sensitive records. Sensitive was one of her favorite words. It was how she made theft sound responsible. In the first 2 years, I thought I was being dramatic. In the 3rd year, I thought I was just tired. By the 5th, I understood that Lydia had built a structure in which everyone around her did the work and she held the doors. She did not scream. She did not throw plates. She did not need public scenes. She used timing, omission, and access. If a payment had to be delayed, she delayed it until I had to apologize to the vendor. If Daniel wanted to propose a new management plan to the board, she would agree in private and then ask a few important questions in public until he looked careless and she looked wise. If I spent 6 weeks preparing for a donor event, Lydia would stand at the podium with the bronze access card hanging from a silk lanyard around her neck and thank the family for preserving legacy. By family, she never meant me. In this house, in this company, and later in the Hale Family Foundation, I was useful in all the places where work happened and invisible in all the places where power sat. The line that kept me there was Daniel, not because he asked me to suffer. He never did. Because in all those years, the one soft place in that rigid house was what he and I built after everyone else went to bed. We ate reheated pasta over the sink. We folded donor brochures at midnight while old Jazz played from his phone. We used the back porch as our real kitchen in summer because Lydia thought grilled food made the house smell ordinary. We laughed over stupid things. We saved seed packets in a biscuit tin because Daniel wanted a vegetable garden someday. When things calmed down, things never calmed down. Lydia made sure of that. She also made sure Daniel never fully stood apart from her. She had a way of pressing guilt into every corner. After everything I carried. After everything that happened when you were young. After the sacrifices this family made to keep you safe. After what your mother's condition did to all of us. That was the phrase she used. Your mother's condition. When I first heard it, I assumed she meant Daniel's biological mother had died long ago, maybe after a long illness, and that Lydia was speaking in the complicated way older families sometimes speak about grief. But the words never sat right. Once, 7 years into my marriage, we were setting out folded name cards for a foundation dinner in the old ballroom at the Mayhew House, one of the estates Hale Heritage managed. Daniel was checking table assignments, and Lydia was reviewing the guest list with the stiff expression she wore when she wanted to show she had standards. A donor's wife asked a light question while adjusting a pearl earring. "Daniel, are you more like your mother or your father?" Daniel smiled politely, but glanced at Lydia first. "Always first," Lydia answered for him. "Daniel has his father's steadiness," she said, "and he had to learn strength very early because of his mother's limitations." The donor's wife nodded with that quick social nod people use when they sense they have touched something awkward. I kept placing cards, but I noticed Daniel's hand still on the seating chart, motionless for a second too long. Later that night I asked him, lightly, what limitations? He took off his tie, folded it once, and set it over the back of a chair. It was before I can really remember much. Mother says it was a mental health crisis after my father got sick. Then things got worse after he died. There were legal steps, care arrangements. I was told she couldn't make decisions safely. He said it in a tone that was too practiced to be natural. Not because he was lying, because someone had told him the same story so many times that it had worn a groove into him. "Did you ever see the papers?" I asked. He gave me a tired smile. "Claire, no child asks for legal papers." That should have ended there. It did not, because once you hear a false note, you start hearing it everywhere. I noticed that Lydia never said Daniel's mother was dead. She said absent, unstable, restricted, protected, delicate, unsuitable, complicated. I noticed a small, locked cabinet in the records room, marked with an old family label I could not place. I noticed that whenever foundation support checks were sent to a care facility called Ashbourne Residence, Lydia signed them herself and filed the copies in the black binder, not the monthly disbursement folder. I noticed that Daniel had never once visited the facility, not once in 11 years of marriage. When I asked why, he looked embarrassed more than angry. "Mother said it only makes things worse," he said. "She said visits can unsettle her. She said when I was younger, I went once, and it caused a terrible regression." Do you remember that? No. That answer lived in me for months. I am the kind of woman who remembers grocery prices, anniversary dates, and the smell of a room when bad news enters it. I remember which employee forgot to initial the insurance renewal on the Whitcomb estate in 2019. I remember what Daniel wore the night he told me he wanted children, but not until the business no longer felt like a ship patched with tape. What I could not forget was how easily a whole adult man had been separated from the woman who gave birth to him, and how normal everyone around him acted about it. The first open insult came in the 9th year of my marriage, and it happened over lemon tart and coffee at Lydia's annual spring luncheon. The room smelled like cut tulips and polished wood. There were 32 guests in pale jackets and expensive perfume, 4 volunteers from the Historical Society, and the usual cluster of bored people who laughed before Lydia finished her jokes. I had planned the event, sourced the food, fixed a seating disaster after 2 donors refused the same table, and spent the morning hauling linen boxes because the delivery team was late. My feet ached, my blouse stuck to my back. Daniel had barely sat down all day. When the thank yous began, Lydia stood with her glass in hand and smiled that careful smile she used when she wanted to sound generous while drawing blood. "And of course," she said, "we must thank Claire, who is always so willing to help with family support tasks. Some women are meant for leadership, some are simply very reliable in the background. A few people gave that polite, useless laugh. Daniel looked up sharply. I felt the room shift. Not loudly, just enough. That was not the worst part. The worst part was that Lydia turned, touched the bronze access card at her neck, as if reminding everyone who moved money in this family, and added, "It is a blessing when a wife understands her place in a larger structure." I smiled. I even nodded. Because by then I knew something the room did not. People like Lydia mistake quiet for surrender every single time. At home that night, Daniel apologized. But he apologized in the way sons apologize for mothers they still cannot oppose. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands locked, and said, "She shouldn't have said it like that." Like that. Not that it was false. Not that it was cruel. Not that it was designed to reduce me in public after a day of work I had carried almost alone. Just that she shouldn't have said it like that. I asked him a question then, and it was not really about the luncheon. Has she ever had to explain herself to anyone? I said, or has everyone in her life just adjusted around her? Daniel rubbed his face. Claire. No, answer me. He looked at me for a long moment with the kind of sadness that only comes when a person begins to see a truth and hates it for arriving late. I don't know, he said. That was the first honest answer he gave me. It was enough. The second major crack came through paperwork. It always does. One rainy Thursday in October, I was in the office annex behind the old Hale house because the upstairs plumbing had gone out again. The annex smelled like dust, printer heat, and old cardboard. I was updating grant support records for the foundation and looking for the previous year's care disbursement file because Ashbourne residents had sent a receipt with a reference number that did not match the foundation ledger. Tiny thing, the sort of tiny thing Lydia usually counted on other people ignoring. The black binder was missing. In its place, shoved behind two property insurance folders, was an older iron lockbox with the paint worn thin near the latch. I should not have opened it. Lydia would have said that for weeks, maybe years, if she had known. I had no key, but the latch had not settled properly. I pressed once and it lifted. Inside were 3 folders, a fabric envelope, and a slim packet of older records tied with a blue ribbon that had gone brittle with age. I remember the exact sound of the rain against the annex window, because the moment I saw Daniel's full name typed beside the words guardianship transfer confirmation, all other sound turned strange. Not gone, just distant. The first document was 21 years old. It listed a temporary emergency guardianship arrangement after a period of family crisis. The guardian named was Lydia Hale, not adoptive mother, not surviving mother, guardian. Temporary. The second document was a later review extension. It referenced the original mother by name, Evelyn Rowan Hale. Not dead, not erased, not unstable in the vague, mythical way Lydia had described. A real person, a real name. The third document was a family record correction filing, years after the first 2, that adjusted internal estate and dependent access language to reflect household representation for continuity of minor management. That wording was so slippery it made my teeth hurt. The attached note made it worse. It referred to maintenance of maternal designation in public records for the minor's long-term emotional stability. Public records. Maternal designation. Maintenance. It was written like a technical fix. It was, in plain language, the careful maintenance of a lie. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down on the concrete floor beside the filing shelves. There was more. Ashbourne residents' care authorizations. Decision restriction renewals that should have been reviewed every few years and were not. Physician notes that were summarized but not attached in full. A letter from an old social worker requesting direct family contact reassessment after, quote, continued stability and improved orientation. That request had been marked deferred. Deferred by whom? Lydia, effectively. The bronze card began to make sense then. The locked records, the payments, the careful vocabulary, the constant claim that she alone kept the family safe from disorder. She had taken a crisis, wrapped herself around it, and never let go. And Daniel, who believed he had been protected from harm, had really been managed away from truth. I sat there for nearly an hour, reading every page twice. Then I did what Lydia never imagined I would do. I copied nothing. I took nothing. I put every paper back exactly as I found it, closed the latch, slid the box into place, finished the ledger update, and went upstairs to ask Lydia whether she wanted rosemary or time with the roast chicken. That night, I barely slept. Daniel lay beside me, one arm thrown across the blanket, breathing evenly, and I stared into the dark, thinking about all the years of missing information, all the rooms I had entered only after asking, all the times Lydia framed control as duty, all the times she invoked Daniel's mother as a cautionary ghost while keeping her alive and separated. I could have stormed into the breakfast room the next morning. I could have thrown papers on the table. I could have demanded answers. That would have made Lydia stronger. Women like her love emotional scenes because scenes let them change the subject from fact to behavior. So I stayed quiet. Silence, in the right hands, is not submission. It is collection. I started with dates, guardianship review intervals, facility payment schedules, signature chains, foundation disbursement approvals, which physician notes were included and which were summarized, which care renewals were signed on time, which ones seemed to continue by habit rather than review. I built a spreadsheet in a file named Archival Catering Invoices because Lydia never opened anything that sounded boring. Over the next 6 weeks, I added one line at a time, 4 delayed review dates, 3 direct family contact requests never acted on, 7 annual payments signed only by Lydia, despite foundation policy requiring a second review for care-related restricted disbursements over a certain amount. One facility notation that made my skin go cold. It stated that Ms. Evelyn Hale had repeatedly asked whether the boy with the green scarf still liked marmalade. Daniel wore a green scarf all through college. I knew because I still had pictures of him in one, laughing on an icy sidewalk with his hair too long and his coat unbuttoned. A woman shut away for years remembered a scarf. That is not nothing. Around the same time, Lydia began tightening the screws in new ways, maybe because power senses challenge even before it sees it. The first new pressure was money. She announced at a family dinner that until market conditions stabilized, all household discretionary spending tied to the family office would need pre-approval. That sounded harmless to Daniel. To me, it meant she had decided my access to the operating accounts would narrow again. The second pressure was social. She told board members I had been under some strain and might be stepping back from several foundation responsibilities. That information somehow spread before I had heard a word of it. 2 women from the volunteer committee asked if I was all right in the soft, fake tones people use when they have already accepted a version of you that was designed by someone else. The third pressure was personal and uglier because it was private. One night, Lydia came into the kitchen when I was labeling storage containers for a donor event. The overhead light hit the stainless steel counters so brightly it made the room feel surgical. She stood by the fridge and watched me cap the soup containers. "You have seemed curious lately," she said. I did not look up. "About what?" "Family records, older disbursements, matters outside your scope." I put the marker down carefully. The grant receipt numbers did not match. She smiled. That is exactly the sort of answer I would expect from a woman who mistakes proximity for authority. There it was again. Not loud, not dramatic, clean and mean. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Some structures exist because other people cannot manage truth responsibly. Daniel has peace because I maintained it. I would think very hard before disturbing what you do not understand." That sentence told me two important things. First, she knew enough to be nervous. Second, she still believed fear worked on me. It used to. Not after the lockbox, not after Evelyn's name, not after the green scarf. I began going to Ashbourne residence under a false excuse so ordinary it was almost insulting. The foundation had once donated bookshelves and reading lamps to the common room there, and I used that old connection to arrange a routine donor follow-up visit. Briar Glen is full of old institutions built by people who wanted their names on brick walls. No one questions a woman arriving with a clipboard and a polite smile. The first time I saw Evelyn Hale, she was sitting near a window with a blue cardigan folded over her knees even though it was not cold. Her hair, once probably dark, had gone soft silver. Her hands were fine-boned and restless over the edge of the cardigan. She was not wild-eyed, not incoherent, not any of the shadowy things Lydia's language had trained me to expect. She looked tired and alert. A nurse named Teresa, who later became one of the few people in that whole season, one trusted on sight, told me quietly that Ms. Hale had good days and confused days, but she had been stable for years and did well with routine, music, and familiar faces. Teresa was not allowed to discuss legal matters with me, but she was allowed to say, "Sometimes people keep old stories alive because old stories are useful." Evelyn looked at me for a long time before she spoke. "You have his eyes?" she said. The words cut through me so fast that for a second I could not answer. "I'm Claire," I said softly. "I'm Daniel's wife." Her fingers tightened on the cardigan. "He married." "Yes." "He still tilts his head before he disagrees?" I laughed then, a short, surprised laugh that broke on the edge of tears. "Yes," I said, "he does." Evelyn closed her eyes. Not dramatically. The way people do when something they have been holding alone for too long is suddenly confirmed by another living person. I stayed 19 minutes on that first visit. I know because I wrote it down in my car before driving away. 19 minutes. That was all it took to understand Lydia's biggest lie. The lie was not only that Evelyn was unfit forever. The lie was that distance had been kind. It had not. It had been useful. For Lydia. I visited again 6 days later. Then again the week after that. I never lied to Teresa. I never asked her to break rules. I asked what the review process was for continued decision restrictions when family conditions changed. I asked who could request an independent reassessment. I asked what happened if the original emergency conditions were never properly reevaluated under current standards. Teresa told me the process. A patient advocate told me the forms. A county review officer's office told me the deadlines. A trust administrator, after a carefully framed inquiry, told me that several linked access permissions attached to protected family assets automatically depended on valid guardianship support status being current. There it was, the structure. Lydia's power was not infinite. It was conditional. She had simply trained everyone to act as if it were permanent. Before we continue, I want to say this. Hidden Revenge Stories channel shares stories of people who take back control of their lives. If this story speaks to you, leave your thoughts below and tell me where you are listening to this story from. Do you have children? What are they and their partners like? I did not tell Daniel immediately. I know some people would hate me for that, but they were not married to a man who had spent his whole life inside another person's version of mercy. Truth is not just information. Sometimes it is a structural collapse. I needed more than a wound. I needed a path through it. So I kept gathering. I found an older foundation bylaw amendment that Lydia had pushed through after Daniel turned 25. It was presented as a continuity measure, but buried in the language was a clause tying several family trust access functions to quote, current protective household authority. That meant Lydia's bronze card, her sign-off power, and her approval role over certain historical property reserves were all hooked into the guardianship framework, even though no one in public life thought of it that way anymore. I also found the weakest point. A mandatory legitimacy review had effectively been skipped because the same supporting narrative had been carried forward from older documents instead of rebuilt with current independent evidence. In simple words, Lydia's authority had been renewed by momentum and deference, not by proof. That alone would not have been enough. Systems do not correct themselves just because one person notices rot. What mattered was that Lydia herself, in her endless confidence, had recently done something greedy. She had begun moving to consolidate the family office, foundation approval routing, and the reserve access structure under a long-term efficiency plan because Daniel's company's success had finally made the Hales richer in ways Lydia could touch. She wanted the older estate funds, the foundation-linked disbursement rights, and the operating decision flow to sit under one cleaner internal authority chain, her chain. She pushed the plan hard. She wanted it presented at the annual governance review meeting in January, where board members, the trust representative, the family attorney, the county-linked compliance officer, and key stakeholders would all be in the room together. Public enough to matter, formal enough to bind, the perfect place to bless her power forever. She thought I would help prepare it. I did. That was the fake defeat. I drafted schedules. I printed comparative account routing charts. I formatted the review packet. I smiled through planning calls. Lydia mistook my calm for surrender so completely that she once asked me, while sorting embossed place cards, "Have you finally learned that peace is better than pride?" I answered, "I've learned that timing matters." She heard obedience. What I meant was something else. 2 weeks before the meeting, I told Daniel everything. Not in the office. Not across a formal table. Not after one of Lydia's attacks. I told him in the half-built greenhouse frame behind the old carriage house, the one project that had remained ours for years because Lydia dismissed it as impractical. Snow sat in the yard like cold sugar. The air smelled like wet soil and cedar. Daniel was trying to fit a warped panel into place when I handed him copies of the first 3 documents and said, "Before you read these, I need you to know that none of this changes who you are. It changes what was done around you." He read, standing up. Then he sat on an overturned bucket because his knees almost gave way. There are moments when a person's whole history moves inside their face. I watched grief, disbelief, fury, shame, and a terrible childlike hope pass through him one after another. He read Lydia's name. He read temporary guardian. He read Evelyn Rowan Hale. He read the maintenance language. He read the deferred reassessment note. And then he said the quietest sentence I have ever heard from him. She was alive. I knelt in the dirt in front of him and took both his hands. She is alive. He stared at me as if the room of his life had opened in a wall where he had always been told there could only be brick. Why didn't she come for me? The question was not rational. It was not adult. It was a son's question pulled raw out of old years. Because someone controlled every door, I said. He cried then, not loudly. Daniel cried like a man ashamed of the sound of his own grief, shoulders bent, mouth hard, tears dropping into the dust on his gloves. I held him and felt anger move through me so cleanly it no longer looked like rage. It looked like clarity. The next 48 hours mattered more than the next 48 speeches ever could. I brought Daniel to Ashbourne residence through the proper process after Teresa and the patient advocate helped arrange a supervised reintroduction with current oversight. Nothing secret, nothing dramatic, no storming doors. The world Lydia built had depended on private control. I wanted every next step to happen in the open. I did not go into the room with him for the first 5 minutes. Later, he told me Evelyn looked at him as if she had been holding one breath for 20 years and was finally allowed to release it. He said she touched his sleeve first, then his cheek, then laughed once through tears because his hairline matched his father's, but his ears were still the same stubborn little ears. He laughed when he told me that. Then he cried again. That visit did not fix anything. It was not a miracle scene. Evelyn drifted in and out. Daniel had to introduce himself twice. At one point, she asked if he still hated peas. He does. At another point, she asked where his school shoes were. The years did not heal because of one room and 1 hour. But truth entered. That was enough to start. Daniel wanted to confront Lydia immediately after that. I said no, not because she deserved protection, because we deserved a complete ending. If we confronted her in the kitchen, she would lie in the kitchen. If we confronted her in the study, she would control the study. If we confronted her in private, she would reshape memory later and tell the board that grief had confused. Daniel and I had stirred instability for my own influence. No, I wanted the room where her authority had always fed. I wanted witnesses, records, protocols, and her own chosen review agenda, so we kept moving forward. Daniel requested, through proper channels, an independent guardianship legitimacy review and current capacity reassessment support check. The patient advocate's office advanced the timing because multiple older restrictions appeared to depend on outdated evidence. The trust office flagged linked permissions for conditional review. The compliance officer added a formal note to the January governance meeting agenda because Lydia's proposed consolidation plan relied on the continued validity of those same linked permissions. She still did not understand the danger. In fact, her confidence grew. That is the thing about people who have been obeyed too long. They stop reading rooms and start reading only themselves. At a pre-meeting dinner in the old dining room, with the yellow lamp light falling over the silverware and the family portrait wall staring down like a church of selective memory, Lydia announced that after January there would be, quote, fewer inefficiencies and less confusion about who speaks for the family. She said it while slicing roast chicken. Her brother Paul, who had spent years as one of her quiet enablers because Lydia kept his consultancy work comfortably attached to family projects, nodded and said, "It's about time." Daniel looked at his plate. Lydia mistook that for agreement. Then she turned to me and said, almost pleasantly, "You've been useful these past weeks, Claire." When women stop resisting structure, they often become much more effective. I set my water glass down carefully and said, "You should read every page before you sign anything in January." She smiled with the bland indulgence of a woman who believed warnings only mattered when they came from equals. "Dear," she said, "I wrote most of those pages." That sentence stayed with me all the way into the meeting. The day of the governance review came bitter, cold, and bright. The meeting was held in the restored assembly hall at the Whitcomb House, one of the Hale properties the foundation loved to use when it wanted tradition on display. There were polished floors, long windows, winter light across the trim, and rows of straight-backed chairs set behind the main conference table for observers, support staff, and invited stakeholders. The room smelled like old wood, coffee, wool coats, and paper. I remember everything. Lydia's cream suit, the bronze access card on its silk strap, the rustle of packets opening, the trust representative, Mr. Keene, aligning his glasses before reading, the county compliance officer, Nora Ellis, with her neat stack of tabbed documents and expression like stone in motion, Paul's red tie, Daniel's silence, my own hands, still. Lydia opened the session with the kind of poised authority she had worn for so many years that some people in that room probably believed it was natural law. She spoke of continuity, stewardship, legacy, and prudent family management. She described the proposed consolidation as if it were simple housekeeping. She thanked the board. She mentioned Daniel's operational leadership. She mentioned my administrative support. She did not look at me when she said it. Then she invited Mr. Keene to confirm the trust alignment steps. That was the first stage, the early disturbance. Mr. Keene cleared his throat and said, "Before trust-linked authority consolidation can be considered, there are preliminary validity questions regarding the protective household designation and associated dependent permissions." The room changed, not loudly, just enough. Lydia smiled the way accomplished liars smile when they think a procedural inconvenience is about to waste their time. "I'm sure we can dispose of those quickly," she said. "Those protections have been in effect for years." Nora Ellis spoke next. "Duration is not itself proof of present validity," she said. Nora was everything Lydia was not. Spare in language, unmoved by status, this sort of woman who put her pen down only after she was certain which sentence mattered. She continued, A current review has identified incomplete renewal substantiation and unresolved questions regarding the continuation of restricted contact assumptions, decision limitation basis, and linked authority dependency. Lydia's face stayed composed, but the hand near her water glass tightened. I could see it from across the table. Then came the second stage, the official confirmation. Nora opened the packet to a flagged section. Mr. Keene did the same. Daniel did not move. He had read all of it the night before, then read it again at dawn. Nora said, "The original arrangement was emergency-based and temporary in character. Later continuations appear to have relied heavily on inherited narrative summaries rather than current independent evaluation. Additionally, there are documented indications of long-term stability, missed reassessment opportunities, and at least one earlier recommendation for direct family recontact review that was deferred rather than actioned." People in the room started turning pages more quickly then. "Paper has a sound when confidence begins to die," Lydia interrupted, calm but sharper now. "Those records reflect sensitive care realities. Partial summaries are common in family protective situations." Nora did not blink. "The issue is not whether summaries exist. The issue is whether continuation of authority remained justified under current standards, when later evidence suggested a need for review." Paul shifted in his chair. One board member removed her glasses to read more closely. The family attorney, who had spent years acting as though Lydia's version of events was not his problem, stared down at the table with the flat expression of a man recalculating risk. Then Daniel spoke. This mattered, not because he was the loudest, he was not, because for the first time in that room he spoke without first checking Lydia's face. "I met Evelyn Hale last week," he said. No one moved. Lydia actually laughed once, short and cold. "Daniel, this is not the place for emotional confusion." He turned to look at her, and I think that was the first moment she understood she was no longer speaking into the old child she had trained. He said, clearly, "Her name is Evelyn Rowan Hale. She is my mother. She was alive while you told me distance was mercy. She was stable enough, years ago, for a reassessment request to be made. You never told me." Lydia's color changed then, not dramatically. A small draining around the mouth. That was all. Still, she tried. Women like Lydia always try. "What you are doing," she said, "is dangerous to a vulnerable woman and humiliating to this family. Claire has clearly encouraged a reckless misunderstanding." There it was, the last predictable move. Turn truth into instability. Turn the woman who found the record into the woman who broke the peace. I had been waiting for that. I slid a supplemental file across the table to Nora and Mr. Keene. It contained the dates I had built quietly over weeks, cross-referenced with publicly available procedural requirements, foundation bylaw language, disbursement thresholds, and linked access dependencies. Not dramatic, not emotional, just structure. I prepared an index. I said, "It shows the renewal gaps, the deferred review note, the care disbursement pattern, and the dependency clause tied to current protective household status in the proposed consolidation packet." Lydia snapped. "You had no authority to prepare that." I met her eyes. "For the first time," I said, "neither did you." That was the line. Short, cold, earned. The room held still for 1 second that felt longer than some years. Then Nora gave the conclusion. "Based on the review before us," she said, "continued reliance on the prior guardianship-based authority structure cannot be treated as valid without full reestablishment, and current evidence does not support that continuation today. Accordingly, linked permissions depending on that status are suspended pending correction." Mr. Keene added, "Trust-linked authority access under the proposed consolidation cannot proceed. Existing guardian-dependent permissions are frozen for transition. Direct review with the original mother's current legal standing and supported decision capacity will follow through corrected channels." The bronze card around Lydia's neck had never looked like jewelry to me. It looked like a gate. Now it looked small. Then came the third stage, the self-collapse. Because people like Lydia cannot survive on facts alone. They need atmosphere. And when atmosphere leaves, they reach too fast. She stood up. not fully shouting, but near enough. "This is absurd," she said. "That woman could not raise him. I did. I carried this family. I kept the company standing. I made decisions no one else was strong enough to make. Daniel would have been ruined by chaos. The properties would have been lost. The foundation would have been gutted. None of you know what it took." No one interrupted her. That was the worst thing that could have happened to Lydia. Silence, for once, was not submission. It was exposure, because every sentence she added moved her further from careful steward and closer to exactly what she was. Not protector, owner, not mother, controller. Then she made the final mistake. She grabbed the bronze card, pulled it from her neck, and said, "You think this means anything without me? You think any of you can manage what I built?" Mr. Keene answered before I could. "It means quite a lot without you," he said. "That is precisely the point." A soft sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not sympathy. Recognition. Paul leaned back in his chair and looked suddenly smaller than I had ever seen him. 2 board members would not meet Lydia's eyes. The family attorney began writing notes much faster than before. One volunteer from the Historical Society, a woman Lydia had once corrected in front of a crowd for folding table linens, like a caterer, watched with open astonishment. Daniel stood then. He did not tremble. He did not perform grief. He did not yell. He said, "You told me you were protecting me from pain. You were protecting your hold." Lydia looked at him with the disbelief of a ruler hearing a language she thought she had abolished. Then Nora asked for the bronze card. A small thing. A devastating thing. Lydia did not want to surrender it. You could see that immediately. Her fingers pressed into it so tightly her knuckles whitened. For one absurd second, I thought she might actually refuse, not because she could legally keep it, but because surrendering a symbol can be harder than surrendering an argument. At last she placed it on the table. The sound it made on the polished wood was light. It felt enormous. After that, the meeting did not end quickly, and I am glad for that. Real endings should not be rushed into a neat sentence. They should unfold until everyone in the room understands that the old shape of things no longer exists. Nora outlined next steps: transitional authority correction, direct standing review, updated trust routing, family foundation conflict disclosures, independent care liaison support for Evelyn, temporary dual signature operational controls until corrected authority maps were entered. Every line stripped another invisible layer from Lydia's old reach. Because she had pushed for consolidation, every hidden dependency had been brought into one room. Because she wanted more, she lost what she had. That is how real collapse should work. Not because someone screams louder, because greed asks to be formalized, and formality forces light. The aftermath in the hall was almost as telling as the meeting itself. Men who had praised Lydia's steadiness for years suddenly had coats to button and phones to check. Paul tried to say to Daniel, "You know your aunt meant well all these years," and Daniel looked at him with such calm contempt that Paul stopped halfway through the sentence and walked away. Lydia approached me once, near the coat stand under the portrait of a dead benefactor whose eyes always seemed too pleased with himself. "You think you've won," she said. Her voice had changed, still controlled, much thinner. "This was never a game," I said. "You took advantage of confusion." "No," I said. "I stopped helping you maintain it." She looked past me then toward Daniel, as if she still believed there might be one more lever inside him she could pull. There was not. He took my coat from the stand, held it open for me, and did not once turn in Lydia's direction. That was one of the quietest and most satisfying moments of my life, not because it was theatrical, because it was new. The weeks after the meeting were heavy, slow, and far more human than revenge stories usually allow. Lydia moved out of the Hale house before the end of February. She did not leave with dignity because dignity requires truth, and she still did not have much use for it. She left behind, labeled, pantry jars, clipped newspaper articles about her own charity work, 2 monogrammed umbrellas, and the empty hook where the bronze card had hung for years. The house felt different immediately. Not cheerful, not healed, just breathable. Daniel and I did not throw parties. We did not stomp through rooms celebrating. We opened windows, even in the cold, and let the stale heat out. We sorted paper. We found old invoices and broken lamps and boxes of things Lydia had kept because control and hoarding are cousins. We repainted the small downstairs office because she had always liked the walls, a color I can only describe as old disappointment. Daniel began seeing Evelyn regularly through the new support process. At first, the visits were careful, supervised, and often painful. There were good days and foggy days. Days when she called him Daniel, and days when she used his father's name. Days when she remembered his green scarf, and days when she asked whether school had let out yet. But even on the scattered days, one thing remained. She recognized warmth. She relaxed when he came. Her shoulders settled. Her hand stopped searching at the blanket edge. Once she laughed because he peeled an orange exactly the way his father used to, leaving one long strip of rind if he could manage it. It turns out love can survive inside damage timing. It just cannot survive endless separation without cost. I went with him often, but not always. Some things belonged first to them. Teresa once told me the most respectful thing a family member can do after years of control is leave room for unforced presence. I never forgot that. Evelyn did not come rushing back to rule anything. That would have been false and cruel in its own way. Recovery is not a crown. It is a series of real mornings. Her legal standing changed through supported correction. Her decision role was rebuilt properly, with help, with clarity, with current evaluations instead of stale fear. The trust routing linked to her position shifted accordingly. That did not mean she suddenly wanted accounts and budgets and authority charts. It meant the life attached to her name was no longer filtered through Lydia's hand. That difference is enormous. Daniel changed too, more slowly than I expected. People assume truth makes a person bold overnight. It can. More often, it makes them quiet first. For nearly a month, he woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold, while the sky lightened over the backyard. Sometimes he talked. Sometimes he did not. Once he said, "I don't know where my memories end and her story begins." I answered the only honest way I knew. Then we build from what is true now. So we did. We started with the smallest things. We moved the check approvals into clean, current systems with no inherited mystery. We separated household life from foundation life. We asked board members who wanted to remain whether they could survive transparency. Some could. Some resigned in phrases full of transition and personal timing because cowardice likes soft language. Paul lost his consulting role within 2 months, not by revenge, by review. Most of what he did was decorative, and decorative men rarely survive competent auditing. The foundation changed too. The volunteer committee gained real oversight. Care disbursements required independent review. Legacy language was cleaned. The room for one person's private mythology shrank. As for me, I stopped asking in my own house. That may sound small to people who have never lived under somebody else's permissions. It was not small. I rearranged the pantry. I moved the everyday plates lower because my shoulders had ached for years from reaching above eye level. I turned the old records room into a working archive with open labeling Daniel and I both understood. I replaced the brass hook where the key ring used to hang with a simple wooden rack and labeled each key plainly, not like a secret, but like a tool. One afternoon in early April, I found the biscuit tin of seed packets under a stack of donated tablecloths. I carried it out to the half-finished greenhouse. Daniel was there with his sleeves rolled and dirt on his wrists. He looked up when he heard me and smiled. The real one, the private one that had survived even Lydia's weather. "I was wondering where those went," he said. "We saved them," I answered. "We forgot them." "Not the same thing." He laughed, took the tin, and kissed my forehead. That spring became the first season in years that did not feel arranged by somebody else's hunger. Evelyn visited the house for the first time in May. We did not stage it as a triumph. No photographers, no stiff lunch, no performance of restoration. Teresa came with her, and so did the patient support driver, because transitions work better when people respect the pace of bodies and minds. Evelyn wore a soft green coat. Daniel met her at the front walk and did not rush. He let her take the path at her own speed past the hydrangea beds Lydia had always pruned too harshly. When Evelyn reached the porch, she stopped and touched the railing. "My husband never liked that paint," she murmured. Daniel looked at me, startled, because no one living in that house now had ever heard that opinion before. Inside, she moved room by room, not as a queen returning, not as a victim reclaiming a stage, but as a woman encountering pieces of her own life through the fog and the theft and the long distance of years. Some things she knew, some she did not. In the back sitting room, she paused by the window and said, "This is where he used to line up his toy trucks." Daniel stared at the floorboards. Later, in the kitchen, Evelyn forgot what she had just said but smiled when I handed her tea in the blue mug Daniel always reaches for first. "That one was a wedding gift," she said. It was. She had chosen it years ago, before everything broke. The records had taken power away from Lydia. The small details gave personhood back to Evelyn. Both mattered. That summer, Daniel and I finally planted the greenhouse beds: tomatoes, basil, beans, and too much zucchini, because every hopeful gardener overestimates their household. Evelyn came twice that month and sat outside in the shade with Teresa, while Daniel argued with a crooked hose fitting and I pressed labels into the soil markers. Once Evelyn watched us and said, not to anyone in particular, "You two look like people who finish things." I nearly cried into a tray of seedlings, because for years I had only been the woman in the background, the helper, the support task, the reliable pair of hands. Lydia's language had reduced me so steadily that sometimes even I forgot how much of our life had stayed standing because I kept finishing what other people dropped. Not anymore. By autumn, the house sounded different. No heels clicking sharp orders down the hall, no tight little corrections over dinner, no pauses before opening doors, as if rooms themselves needed permission. The air carried bread, damp coats, greenhouse soil, paper, coffee, and ordinary peace. That peace was earned, not given. Daniel and I still had damage to sort through. You do not spend decades inside a controlled story and walk out perfectly. There were days he flinched at decision-making, days guilt hit him sideways, days anger came late and embarrassed him. There were days I discovered my own habits of shrinking and felt furious all over again. But the difference was this: none of it was invisible anymore. Truth had not made our life easier in one clean sweep. It had made it ours. The final time Lydia tried to reach back into it came through a letter. Not handwritten. Typed, of course. Lydia preferred distance when she could not dominate in person. The letter was full of words like misunderstanding, sacrifice, painful necessity, and unfortunate distortions. She said history would judge harshly those who undid protective structures without appreciating the burdens of caretaking. I read it once and set it aside. Daniel asked if we should respond. I looked out through the kitchen window at the greenhouse glass catching late afternoon light, at the rows of jars on shelves I had arranged myself, at the wooden key rack with every label plain and ordinary, at the light that no longer moved through one woman's fingers. Then I said no. She had years of answers, she used them all. We did not write back. That too was a form of control. The best ending is not always a speech. Sometimes it is a closed door that stays closed because the house behind it is finally quiet. Now, when people ask what happened to the Hale family, the public version is simple. An outdated authority structure failed review. Linked permissions were corrected. A long-separated mother re-entered her son's life through proper support. The foundation changed governance. The house changed hands of influence. All of that is true. It is not the whole truth. The whole truth is more intimate. A woman who was never a mother in the way she claimed held everything, because everyone around her got used to mistaking access for love. A son lived under gratitude shaped like obedience. A wife did the work of 3 people and was thanked like hired furniture. A real mother stayed alive behind careful language and locked files. And one rainy afternoon, in a dusty annex with a half-broken latch, paper finally stopped pretending. These days, the old Hale house is no longer really the Hale house in my mind. It is just home. The pantry opens without ceremony. The records room is bright and honest. Daniel still tilts his head before he disagrees. He still hates peas. He still reaches for the blue mug. Evelyn still has clear days and cloudy ones, but now her name moves through her own life instead of someone else's mouth. When she visits, she likes the back porch best. She says the wind there feels truthful. On warm evenings, Daniel and I sit at the porch table with dirt under our nails and iced tea sweating rings onto the wood. Sometimes Evelyn sits with us. Sometimes Teresa drops by after a shift and laughs at the size of our zucchini. Sometimes nobody says much at all. That silence feels nothing like the old one. The old silence was control. This one is rest. And whenever I pass the pantry door, I still remember Lydia's voice from years ago. If you need anything, you ask. She was wrong. We needed truth. We did not ask for it. We opened it.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more, you can follow this channel. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to be notified when a new video is uploaded.